Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third talk in our webinar series. My name is Molly Dedmond. I'm the Client Services Coordinator here at PBA Galleries. And today I'm joined by my colleague, Christopher Dunlap, and our two guests. We have Sandow, Birk, and Robert Mailer Anderson. We're going to be talking about artistic collaboration, public art, fine press, and more. We will have the opportunity for questions at the end, so you can either send a message in the Zoom chat to me directly or to the group as a whole, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible at the end. So with that, Chris, the floor is yours.
All right, so welcome everybody. We are joined here by two great California artists, Robert Mailer Anderson here in Northern California, writer and filmmaker, and Sandow Birk down in Long Beach, representing Team SoCal. You two have known each other for quite a long time now. I'm hoping you could just tell us how you got acquainted and some of the projects that you started working on together, and then we'll get to what you're working on and have done recently.
How did we meet? I think, I met Sandow via his work first. I was hip to In Smog and Thunder and really loved his work. And then I believe he had a show and I went to see it, and I was, as I always am, I was super dumbfounded and inspired. And I left off a copy of my novel Boonville that I wrote for him. And somehow you responded or I responded, and we started drinking.
Cheers.
That's how I remember it.
I actually don't remember we first meeting. I had that Smog and Thunder show in San Francisco, would have been like 1998 or something.
No, that's not that long. No, so yeah, I saw that stuff. I knew of your work. I think I saw some of it at the MoMA, or a couple pieces, and another one maybe at the De Young. And so what I meant is I knew you via your work first, and then saw a show probably at Catherine Clark Gallery, and then we met then.
Okay.
It's a while ago.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with this early one by Sandow, it tells a story of an imaginary war between Northern and Southern California, done in the style of propaganda posters from World War I and World War II. Hence the NorCal, SoCal introductions here. But you've gone on to some really great other collaborations. There was the mural at the SF Jazz Center, the 2016 play that Robert published called The Death of Teddy Ballgame, and most recently the film that Robert just released 2 years ago, Windows on the World. So maybe you can talk about Sandow, what it's, about these various projects.
Sure. Well, Robert's film, Windows on the World, I was dying to be involved in that. I think it was like 3 years ago that you filmed it in Mazatlan, and I was out of the country. I was in New Zealand or something, but I would have loved to have been there for that. But yeah, this is great. As far as that, all I did was the poster, I believe.
No, I wish that were true, but actually we had we needed to do the Don Quixote quotes. We had and we needed a way to use as time and consolidate thoughts and ideas. And so you were really good at creating. I think we used five different quotes in the film, and you drew as you did kind of for your Dante books. You drew kind of a modern mashup of the classic Quixote, but in a modern setting.
Right.
We also did, by the way, I think as we got to know each other better too, I did fiction editor for my uncle's newspaper. My uncle has a newspaper, a newsweekly called the Anderson Valley Advertiser. And I was kind of the fiction editor, if you will, for 2 or 3 years. and Sandow was doing an illustration every month. We did a short story every month, and he was illustrating those. And those were more, it was interesting because each of our projects where we've collaborated have been to different degrees. On those, sometimes Sandow would just, read the story and then come up with whatever it was, straight out of his imagination. And then some of our projects, he's been forced to the cruel art direction of me needing something specific or having an idea of my own that he's forced to come to the dance to in some manner, but always making things way, way better. And as he makes them better, then I add on to that too, trying to make it even better, because why not?
Yeah, I would think that the best collaboration we ever did was the SF Jazz Murals, because I came to it not knowing that much about jazz, and Robert knew quite a bit about jazz, and then we'd work on the image and then add details and tweak it and the back and forth 5-6 times, tweaking and adding and removing, and that was a really amazing project. It was really fun, and I learned a lot, and then it became this huge as just a painter, painting this huge enormous thing was challenging, just day to day in the studio with my wife Elise Pignolet, and then it was really great. And then to have it up and permanently there, and every time I see it, it's amazing. So super proud of that.
Did that give you a sort of a push to work on a larger scale?
No, my wife and I, we frequently apply to public art projects a couple times a year. So we probably applied to like 80, but we've only got, we've done 5 or 6, mostly around LA. And
Okay.
So we did one for a police station in LA that was 100 feet long. So it was about the same size. So we knew we were capable of handling the jazz one.
Did you do the discovery of Long Beach with the Long Beach one as well?
Yeah, that's 16 by 16 feet. Yeah.
The interesting one about this, truly, the inside baseball on this one, and there's a lot of inside baseball, but one of the interesting aspects, I think, of the jazz mural was that, Sandow, amongst other things, occupies a place of satire often. And the jazz mural was not really a place of satire. He ended up doing 3 murals, one the history of jazz in the US, one the history in San Francisco, and then one based much more on what you might think in terms of satire, a heaven and hell that's back in the green room. But it was kind of an interesting challenge to kind of take a little bit of that aspect out. I felt it was interesting. I mean, we discovered that late. I was like, this is not kind of the same thing. I remember that as being kind of an early challenge in a way, or just different.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It was really challenging. I think that's the standard way that people do memorial murals is to just put the heads of famous people. And we really wanted to avoid that. And I don't remember at what point we came up with representing the venues instead of the people.
Right.
That was the key thing. And then the whole thing went from heads floating in the sky to like an imaginary city made up of all the structures and famous theaters across the United States. So that was a really cool
and an amalgam of time.
I think it's pretty successful.
Decided that not only was it an amalgam of time, but of the process of how jazz moved, from the South, and from, it starts. Literally, we decided with the drink, right, with the Sazerac and a funeral, the joy and happiness in New Orleans, and then it moved via, around America and Chicago, and then migrated north. And it was really pretty amazing the way that came together. And you did that. I remember at one point too, you found out that the first cab was a Chicago cab, and so that was the kind of car that you used to pull away outside of a Southern Greyhound station, for example. And then we decided that there was open space, or I'm always pushing for more. I'm one of the more is more camp, whereas Sandow's a lot better at focusing on a single image and using its resonance. But there was open space, God forbid. And I remember saying, let's put a newspaper on the ground there. And we were talking about the headlines, and we wanted to come up with a headline or something that would fit all of that, the movement in time. And so I said it should be the murder of Emmett Till. And so there was interesting kind of stuff like that came in. That was truly kind of collaborative and interesting. As you were putting together the visuals of this stuff, once in a while I would chime up with like an idea like that or something. But it was pretty great to just see it all come together. And I remember those conversations, which were really fun.
It was really great. And yeah, I would say throughout everything we've ever done, I have trouble coming up with narratives. You know, I'm not a storyteller, and Robert tells stories and he figures out how one thing leads to the next, and then once he comes up with the idea, I can really come up with the images for it. But in general, I really struggle. Like, Robert's done a graphic novel, and he said, he said, you should do a graphic novel. And I said, I never have any stories. I need someone else to do the story.
I was wondering how that you collaborated on the film, but not on the graphic novel. So back to the
you refused me.
Oh, go on.
No, I think you refused me on that one, or at some point you weren't ready, or you didn't feel like you could do it. I mean, I'm hoping that we do one soon, and together, actually, a graphic novel that we actually do that. But he's also being, you know, his stuff has a lot of storytelling in it. You're a very good storyteller, especially when you lurk in gallery show form. You know, I disagree. I beg to differ, but we have different. I think I have a more novelist kind of approach. But
yeah, well, this, you know, the big narrative stories I've done, like the Divine Comedy, were already written down. So I'm just figuring out how to represent them. And I honestly, when you approached me about working on the graphic novel with you, I really didn't think I was capable. I've never done one. I don't really know how to use that sense of timing and the size of the squares, and it's just not a way that I normally work. It would be really challenging, but I didn't want to do a big important project the first thing I ever tried.
One of the things that I've found out.
Let's talk a little bit about the Imaginary Monument series, going back to the grand scale. I mean, you're a multimedia artist, and this has given you the opportunity to work with Paul Maloney with his special, you know, types of paper and etching press. Maybe you can talk about how you came to the Monuments series, what got you started on that. I mean, it sounds like there's a little bit that you've already said about the public monuments.
Sure, I can talk about that. It all started because I don't remember what year it was, but more than 15 years ago, I got awarded a residency at the Smithsonian Institute. So I went to DC for 2 months. I rented an apartment, and I got basically like a backstage pass to go into all the Smithsonian museums, and I could ask to see stuff in the storage and all that. And I had been to DC when I was like a teenager or something. So I was there for 2 months, and the first week I sort of spent as a tourist, like visiting all the monuments and looking at stuff and going to the National Archives. And what really struck me about DC was the way that all the tourist stuff that you do, it's always like 1776. It's always Ben Franklin impersonators, and it's, you know, it's always the revolution. But then you're in the street, and like in the building across the street, it's like the IRS building, and those people are like chasing you down for your taxes. And so there was this thing about how it's always represented as being 200 years ago, but the city actually functions, it's affecting your life as you're living it. And I went to see the National Archives, and I saw the Constitution, and I picked up some pamphlet, and I read the Constitution, which only takes like 15 minutes. And I just somehow came up with this idea of, you know, I thought everyone should read the Constitution. I haven't read it since high school, probably. And this is the document that affects everything we do. And I came up with this idea of making a monument to it, with the idea that this imaginary monument would depict like a giant triumphal arch, but it was important that you could actually read the entire Constitution and amendments in the image I came up with. So I drew this enormous image, and then I started working with Paul Maloney, and he turned it into this amazing, enormous etching. And then that just kicked it off. And since then I started doing a whole series of like important world documents that people should know, imagined as if they were monuments that you could go walk around and read the text.
And even some that don't exist that you've done proposals for. Have you ever sent any of those proposals in the mail as a straight proposal?
I don't know to whom. They're all imaginary. Most of them couldn't be built, but they're all imaginary, you know.
But some of the documents are real and some of the documents are not real, right?
No, all the documents are real.
Oh, okay.
I did like the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the Declaration of Independence, you know, all these real documents that affect us that should be read.
Interesting that the word monument actually can mean document as well as, you know, sepulcher or some other secondary meanings. But I was thinking we could talk a little bit about monuments just sort of in the general culture. I mean, what was going on out in the world with public art and, you know, these statues that are being torn down now, or hope to be torn down. You started in 2013 with this?
Yeah, maybe even sooner. But yeah, from the very beginning, my project was always just imaginary, fanciful, you know, monuments that were never intended to be built. And then this whole discussion of tearing down monuments came about maybe later, or maybe became more important later. But
I was also thinking about that scene in your movie, Robert, where there's actually, I should say that September 11 kind of looms over both of your most recent projects, or relatively recent projects. Robert, your movie, Windows on the World, and Sandow, your American Koran. There is a scene in Windows on the World, actually a very pivotal scene, where Balthazar's absence is, you know, feared to be permanent by his son, and they go to one of those 9/11 shrines. And it's a moment where, you know, all of the ethnic and class differences seem to dissipate in the movie. I was wondering if you could both talk about your, you know, first of all, that scene as a monument, and second of all, as September 11th has informed your artistic works.
Robert,
why don't you talk about that scene in the movie first?
Making those monuments, I think one of the interesting things was doing it in New York, where we thought that people might be really, really upset because, you know, we were working on the street and stuff, recreating this stuff. And, you know, we were met with just a great amount of support, which kind of shocked me, because, you know, we figured 1 out of every 2 New Yorkers would be trying to kick them out or something in a weird way, you know, saying that we weren't going to get at the story or something. But people use that stuff as, even when we were filming, as a kind of a cathartic experience, which reminded me again of the intention of art and other things in the human spirit of lighting a single candle and then setting it amongst many. And in the story too, he actually, you know, sets it down with his father's letters and a copy of Don Quixote, you know, which is, you know, an attempt to really write, you know, understand consciousness. And so at that point, you know, it's a monument that comes together as made, not necessarily by a single artist, but as a movement, and almost spontaneous, but probably within the mold of a culture. You know what I mean? At that point, I think it probably becomes, you know, something else that way. But, you know, we also actually, there's an immigrant, there's a statue to immigrants downtown where we also shot and use that in the film as well, as a kind of contrast. But the idea of monuments now is, it's clearly being rethought in some ways, and is a long overdue conversation, for sure.
Well, regarding September 11th, it's not really the September 11th immigration story that I was anticipating. It's a story of a Mexican family trying to find their father, who was, disappeared or disappears himself, in the conflagration there.
Well, it's one of labor in a way, and people who are unseen. Earlier I think you sent a letter about the unknown soldier, and so in some ways, you're in that way. A lot of those monuments are lit, the single kind of light for the wish that the person lost, or the unseen person can live beyond that particular moment. And in America, in this moment, and in general, the kind of colonialization is there's a lot of labor that goes unseen. And in that building's collapse, one of the final insults was they weren't even, a lot of people that were working in that building weren't even recognized as ever even being alive, let alone, coming from a different place and having families as well. And so we felt like that was the story that needed to be told. Of course, we thought about that 20 years ago, and then it's playing out in different ways now. Sandow also did a bunch of monuments in a weird way that I felt inspired by in that same sense. Is he actually did drawings and paintings of all the prisons in California, which I think is another sort of monuments in a weird way to how do you see those, Sandow, in terms of like landscape and the way those came up in terms of standing as monuments? Do you look at prisons or those particular things as having an aspect of that?
I didn't consider them as being monuments at the time I was working on them. No, that was more, I think at one point in my career, I was looking at like my long-term career, and I had this idea that I was going to try to tackle every sort of thing that painting does and turn it into something. So I wanted to do like portraiture, still life, landscape, and I wanted to do each sort of genre and try to do something with it. And so I saw those as being a little commentary on the idea of landscape painting and how landscape painting, historically could be used as propaganda from, the 1800s to sort of get people to migrate to California. And so I was playing with the idea of how to make landscape paintings that actually mean something. And I hit upon the idea of, I depicted every single state prison in California because I was mimicking the landscape paintings that were done right before photography was invented, when people were coming out from New York and like photographing the West and doing these grandiose romantic paintings sort of to show to East Coasters to say, come out to paradise in the West. And the remarkable thing that it went from, in 150 years, the vision of California went from Eden on Earth, where there's gold in the ground and oranges in the trees and eternal sunshine. And it went from that to the most incarcerated people in the world. So it was just a shocking 150-year transformation.
You do have a monument to the prison industrial complex in the imaginary monuments, right?
Yes, that was many years later. But yeah, I took all the important documents in court cases that the laws that started to put people into jail in mass amounts, and then the gradual, Supreme Court decisions, or California Supreme Court decisions that gradually started to let them out in a trickle.
We also used
okay.
Sorry to interrupt, but we used a painting from your Travesties of War series too, which came out after 9/11 in response to, it seemed, for the opening credits of this drive-in type film I made, Pig Hunt. But the Travesties of War series that you did was like pretty amazing as well, and as a direct result of 9/11.
Yeah, I did a big project working with Paul Maloney and Elise Pignolet and other people. It was a whole series of prints all about the war in Iraq. when George Bush the first was president, and we were upset about the war. So we did a series of prints that told the history from how the war began to how we were imagining it was going to end, because at the time it was still going on.
And again, always with a sort of frame from art history. You know, this is Callot and Goya, right? In their style, embedding it into a kind of everyday American scene. You did the same thing with Gustave Doré and in the Trillium Divine Comedy. You use these models from art history and then give them a sort of ironic or oblique twist. And that leads to American Koran, where you're using a canonical literary text and putting it in the context of, you know, sort of vernacular, you know, everyday life.
Yeah, well, speaking in general terms, you know, making art takes a long time. And I like that at the end of a long time, if I'm going to work on something that long, the result means something. And I like to make, you know, political statements or make works that say something that I believe in. And then the constant conundrum is, how do you make work about a contemporary event that still remains relevant after the event is over? So how do you do stuff about the war in Iraq, and the war in Iraq is over 10 years later? How is it still an important piece of work? And the way I've tried to come up resolving that problem is by tying the work that I do into the history of artwork about anti-war works, so that the war may be over, but it's still, you can see that it's tied to this sort of universal historical series of works about the atrocities of mankind against himself.
Yeah, something archetypal, I guess. You know, Robert, you use the same technique a little bit with the Don Quixote throughout the film.
We were for a while there. People, especially, you know, when we got around to doing that as well. But there's Mexicans were being maligned, especially here in California, but all over, and immigrants, and, you know, called savages and all kinds of stuff. And we wanted to remind people that there's a long culture coming here, you know, like, you know, one that gave us Don Quixote, one of us that, you know, arguably gave us the first novel, you know what I mean? And so we wanted that to be something that whether the father could understand that or not, handed to his son, and is definitely there. So that was part of it, aside from, you know, it would have been a totally different book if he had a copy of On the Road. It would have meant something entirely else, you know? He wasn't going to carry Naked Lunch or the Stories of Flannery O'Connor or something. Although,
well, I'll wrap my part up here and say that San Francisco was only treated as purgatory in your Divide and Comedy, and New York City was got the paradise.
But that's oversimplification. If you look at the project, New York is represented equally as on the equal plane as all the other cities. The idea was to show that the Divine Comedy images I did were showing that the events are happening in an American contemporary unnamed urban space, and to contrast that with the text, which is saying that Dante's actually gone to hell and gone to heaven, but in the pictures you actually see he's just sort of wandering around the world that we live in, sort of a negating of the afterlife.
Tony Kushner made San Francisco heaven, I believe, in Angels in America. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, you might have had to answer some questions on why you posed a San Francisco and purgatory. So nice bullet dodged there. So I think we can move on to questions from the audience. If anyone wants to send in their questions in the chat, I'm happy to ask them. I've got a couple here that we can just start off with. This is for Sandow. you've worked with both fine press and trade publications. Do you think that fine press works have allowed you more leeway in how your art is used than in trade publications?
Yeah, for sure. I guess the answer is I really haven't worked with trade press publications. I've worked with fine art people almost everything I've done, and they've been fantastic. But, you know, especially Paul Maloney, I come up with an idea, and I said, we want to do an etching 10 feet tall. And he says, okay, we can do it. So the fine art people have made the projects happen. And then in the case of the Divine Comedy project I did, they were done as fine art books, which we then just took to Chronicle books to make a trade thing, and they just sort of adapted it. So it wasn't really, you didn't have to really work with them or compromise or anything.
Right, didn't start there, started with the fine press and moved to trade.
Is there a plan to do like a big folio of the Imagine Monument series?
There's always that plan, you know, there's fewer and fewer books sometimes, it seems like, and but yeah, there's always ideas of getting books made that sort of float around, and we'll see what happens.
Well, here's a question for Robert about, speaking of book publications and a graphic novel, and moving a graphic novel format between a novel and the screen. Wondering what was emphasized and de-emphasized in that transition.
Well, mostly we were able to go back to a lot of the minutia and stuff that's long. You can tell a longer, you have more real estate for starters with the book than you do when you're actively shooting a screenplay, which continues to kind of get a little bit smaller, and then you're chasing light and all those other things. And so we actually started the graphic novel project earlier, and we were able to contain even more of it and to go off and have a lot of the side stories and stuff told more. And then John Sack did a fantastic job, and we're working on another graphic novel right now as well. We're about a third of the way through. And Fantagraphics did such a wonderful job publishing the first one. We hope that this one will land there too. But it's interesting. It seems to my untrained eye that some of the idea of the screen and the imaging, is a combination of both film narrative and a book narrative. And so it fits kind of in that in-between land really well, of going large and then coming in and using, even some of the language of it. But John was really, great at also presenting full pages and how and when the dialogue was spoken and stuff. So, it was a great process. You also get a chance to sort of recast everything as well, which is fun.
Excellent. Got another one here. Someone has a copy of Dante, which they really enjoyed. Would Sandow be interested in revisiting other classics like the Odyssey or Shakespeare?
When I finished the Divine Comedy, it was really well received, and people were sending me all kinds of ideas, and even Chronicle was pitching me that I should do the Odyssey or some such thing, or Beowulf or something. And I floated around. I was thinking about it for years, but it really led me to the Quran. I wanted to do something unexpected. I wanted to do something out of the Western canon. And the Divine Comedy project took me about 5 years, in which I was just totally immersed in Dante and Catholicism and this whole religious view of the world. And I really just wanted to go completely opposite and think, how do other people think about the afterlife? And so I went to the Quran, I started reading it, I found it fascinating, and I decided to make an illuminated manuscript of the Quran, and that was the project that came after Dante.
That related to that, we're wondering, do you think that the American Quran could have been published without first the publication of the Divine Comedy? Do you think, it sounds like one sort of inspired you to go hard the other way, or to explore a different idea, but do you think you would have dove right into that without the Divine Comedy?
I don't know. It might have, I don't know. Would I have found the Quran on my own? Probably. I've traveled a lot in Islamic parts of the world, so had an interest in it. And, you know, the war in Iraq was going on, which made me interested in learning more about Islam. Whether it would get published, I have no idea. I mean, maybe because I had a little bit of a track record, it helped. But, you know, it was the biggest project I've ever done. It was serious. It was, I think it's good. So I hope someone would have published it.
Excellent. I have a question that was just dropped off to me in person. When you're brainstorming on a collaboration, and I suppose this is for both of you, is it more is it more of a social collaboration where you have ideas? Is it more in the studio? Is it more planning out the production in which the collaboration happens? Or is it more, I mean, it seems that you all get along. Is it more of a sort of social brainstorming, or is it all within the actual creation of the final product?
I would say a lot of it spurs from need. Oftentimes the Sandow is really great, but I will need something. You know, I'm a pretty needy guy that way. And so we needed stuff for our Windows on the World. We've needed him to make posters. We've needed him to, you know, we needed him to do a mural. We needed you to help me with my play for those illustrations. Even the record, he did, we've needed a lot of stuff like that. And then other stuff has come up a little bit more organically in terms of like, other murals and things like that. Sometimes, it's just about Sandow having time to focus his branch and Elise towards something. He's made a couple murals for us too. I think about that. And so home improvement, we needed some home improvement.
Yeah, I'm going to just interject a question here and be selfish. I saw at the Robert in the credits of the movie, there's several songs that you wrote.
Adam Mead again.
Who did you collaborate with on those? Who did the music, or did you write the music?
On those, David Russo, who's a dear friend and composer of the music for Windows on the World, and we've worked together before. I ended up writing the melodies and then the lyrics, and then we would fill them out together. And also the SF Jazz Collective, friends in the SF Jazz Collective, either as a whole or part of them, recorded songs and helped with arranging things larger. And those guys are super talented and composers, but they also can work old school where you can hum or sing something and then they get it, and you can work right there and say, oh, not that or this and so I was able to write the songs kind of within that way as well. And then bringing people in, and then you start arranging things, having sessions, taking it, worked with Eric Harlan, a dear friend of mine. And he made this wonderful piece based on what I sang into this thing and told him how I wanted it. And then he did it twice. And then we decided we needed a trumpet solo. So we called my friend Sean Jones and we told him what we were looking for. And, he gave us like 5 versions. And then David and I would piece in those versions, of the arrangement to create the space and the overlay and stuff. That's super fun. I love that. I mean, I love the creative process, and Sandow and I are good friends. We, I love seeing him socially, and I don't get to see my friends nearly enough unless we're working. And I love being around super bright, smart people making shit. And so, my work is always better if I can, have Sandow there, you know what I mean? Always. I mean, that's a great place to jump in. Same with David or my friends in the collective. So I like that. It's not nearly as lonely as going to a room and writing novels. So that's also fun.
Here's a practical question for you. Where can we watch Windows on the World?
Amazon Prime, Google Play, VIX, who was fantastic and picked it up in Spanish language. I think it's on most of the, you can get it by Googling the apps, and it should be Hulu too, maybe? Voodoo, go to that Hulu Voodoo that you do so well. But I think if you just did a quick search for Windows on the World film, Edward James Olmos is in it. Ryan Guzman. They're both fantastic. Richard Cabral. You know, Jacqueline Oberdors. I mean, there's a lot of really good performances in it. And so, and Sandow's work. Sandow just, you know, you see his stuff, his work coming in there as well, which is, you know, linchpin stuff for us.
Perfect. Well, and Maggie has actually just sent a link. So if anybody is in the Zoom wants to follow that link, it's in the chat there to go watch it, and we can.
You know what? I don't even have a cell phone. I'm the least technically kind of guy in the world, and so I'm bad at that. But if you go to www.windowsontheworldfilm.com, you should find it.
Great, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I don't know if anyone has any last-minute questions here that they want.
I have a last one if no one else does.
Absolutely, Chris, go for it.
Well, Sandow, you talked a little bit about how you did research for the Imaginary Monument series at Smithsonian, but you're a real art historian as well as an artist. I'm wondering if you are a print or art collector on top of just what people give you.
No, not really. I wish I could be, but
then
no.
Where do you do your research? Museums and libraries?
Yeah, and a lot of travel. I've always traveled a lot. I've been a lifelong surfer, so I like to go to different countries and go surfing and end up in strange places, and then go to all the museums that you can visit, you know, like Manila or something, and you just stumble on something amazing, and it just sparks an idea. And I would say travel is probably the biggest inspiration.
All right. There's one more, if we have time for it. I have a copy of the Constitution. There's a space at the end of the text. What was your thinking about that?
In my monument, that's because it's for the amendments. And if you look at the image, that side of the monument on the top is still under construction because the amendments are meant to be added on as times evolve and the nation evolves. So there's a space there for the next amendments that will be coming down the road someday.
Excellent.
I think the next amendment's going to be, Sandow.
National Voting Rights Act, maybe that would be a good one. I don't think it's going to pass anytime soon, but equal rights for women, that could be written in there. That would be nice. About 230 years overdue.
Nothing to laugh about. These are no laughing. Only within the only within the confines of satire do we laugh, because it's so fucking sad.
Well, if you don't laugh, you'll cry, right?
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining us, and thank you for everyone for participating and for watching the talk and asking questions. We have been really enjoying hosting these, and we hope to have a lot more in the future. So, Chris, thank you for being our host also, and thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, fellas.
And hopefully we'll see you for the next one.
Bye.
Bye.